Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
It was I who was the only.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
The Comics Kid 2099.
And the Geek for Fun.
Indeed. And today we are doing a discussion topic, and Ruben's, discussion was, his topic, I got it, but it was a little vague, and he had to kind of, boil it down for us to just a couple words. So what is the title of the episode, Ruben?
Nostalgia for a specific era in popular culture.
That's too wordy. You got it.
Okay.
3 words. 3 words. It's got to be 3 words.
Nostalgia in popular culture.
Okay, good enough. All right. So with that, go ahead and expand on it more as to what you meant.
So I just recently watched That 70s Show, and it occurs to me that this is just enough of a thing that I'm seeing it as a trend, and I'm curious why it's a trend. So, when they made That 70s Show, I mean, it could have been any time period, but they specifically chose to, spotlight that era as something, worth going back to. And then you see this in a lot of other shows. The Goldbergs is set in the 80s. Fresh Off the Boat is set in the 90s. Happy Days back in the 70s was set in the 50s. So, I feel like I know what the answer is, and it may not even be a very interesting answer, but I'm just really curious why this is a thing as much as it is. Most shows are going to be set in the present day, it seems like, but why do we have these shows where it's spotlighting an era that the creators of the show probably grew up in? I'm just curious why that is as much of a thing as it is.
Okay, so let me posit my theory. I think it's because of regret more so than nostalgia. I think a lot of that comes from people who have very clear memories of that decade or that era and wish they had done things differently in that time period. And so they kind of just... they go off and they do a career and they end up successful in other ways, but they wish their life had been different in this period of time, or they wish they'd done things differently or maybe lived differently in this period of time. So they decide to highlight it and maybe even go back and do some wish fulfillment, or in the case of the Goldbergs, go back and try to kind of acknowledge the weirdness of it or the awkwardness of the time. That's my pet theory right now, because everything, Goldberg's is a bit of an exception. I haven't seen Fresh Off the Boat, so I can't really comment on that, but the 2 main examples that you used were Happy Days and That 70s Show, and both of those, I don't know if romanticize is the right term, but they idealize the time a little bit. Obviously they still have character drama and your typical sitcom stuff, but Fonzie would hit the jukebox and it'd suddenly work, and he'd be like, "Hey," and you got the friends sitting around in the circle smoking weed, and they're just having the greatest time ever, and they're laughing constantly and getting into wacky misadventures. It seems to kind of idealize the spirit of the era, the zeitgeist of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Alfie, what do you think?
I guess it's kind of I can see what you're saying with like the regret point, but I also feel like a lot of it is like I guess I use like the example of like people who write things or create things which they were never born in, or even their parents might have been on. Like you get like period pieces. Again, Ruben, if this is going outside of the idea of the topic you're going for, please like correct me. But stuff that's set in like the 1800s or stuff is also like people do it as a kind of exploration of different time periods in the same way as stuff like Mad Men set in the 60s. I feel a lot of it does have to go with kind of talking about like the politics of the time, and many times it kind of is to talk on a current issue, or like to like highlight how things really haven't changed, that kind of idea in like a general sense. But I think a lot of people just do it for like aesthetic, and just this kind of every, especially like once we get past the 1920s, America especially has like every decade has like a very unique aesthetic that I feel like people want to play with.
Okay. Ruben, I don't know, you said you thought you might have like a quick and easy answer. What's your take on it all?
I honestly was not thinking of regret, and that's very likely, and I think that's like it would require a whole lot more research to really like say yes or no on that. But I honestly just thought the simple answer was like, whoever it was who pitched that 70s show said, hey, I grew up in that time period. It was really fun. And like you said, like it idealizes that time period. Like maybe there's some of it that's not as idealized. Like one of the first episodes of that 70s show is the president is coming to town, and then they pick Red Foreman to ask him a question, and like they touch on a little bit of the politics there. Like the question he ends up asking is, how could you have pardoned Nixon? So like there's a little bit of that like real world drama that was going on at that time. But you're right, like it mostly, like in the special features for that DVD, they even said like that was the last innocent decade. And I don't know how much I agree with that, but that does seem like something that, if somebody now wanted to create a show from when they were a kid, like it'd be super surreal for me if someone did a show set in the very early 2000s.
The
like,
OOs, the OOs show.
yeah. And like fresh off the boat, I don't know when exactly it's set. I know it's set in the 90s, but like I feel like the early 90s still feels like it's distant enough that you can do something like that. And like Alfie said, you're exploring an almost unknown time period. Like your target demographic, it would be just completely unknown to them. So they have no idea what the early 90s would be like. So you're doing the show, I don't want to call it like a fantasy, but it's like it's an unknown world, just like, Middle Earth. And so, this is something that people working on the show, they're in their 40s, they know what it was like. And so part of it is they're angelicizing, however you say it, this time period that wasn't as sweet and innocent as maybe they're letting on, but also like they're able to introduce it to a new generation and maybe say like, this is what you guys missed out on, and not in a gatekeepy way, but kind of a like, isn't this cool? Like I want to share this neat thing that I experienced with you, and you can never experience it, but you can in this way. So I feel like that's why, but I don't know, like you said that the Goldbergs is different. I've never actually sat down and watched that show. I was just aware that it was set in the 80s. How is it different than the others?
Well, it's different because the guy that's like the main character, as a kid he had a fascination with making movies with his family's VHS recorder, and so at the end of every episode he'll play, like during the credits they play one of the like clips from the movies he was making as a kid, and so there's a very real connection, and it's just very kind of mocking to some degrees. And I don't want to like sit here and like act like I'm a Goldberg stan or something. I've seen like maybe 5 episodes in total. But it's just, it seems more self-aware. It seems like it's not really idealizing the time. It seems like it's more mocking some of what was going on at the time. I don't know. It's just, the feel of that one feels a lot more self-aware and less just less like that 70s show. And it's funny, we've talked about all these. You know what we haven't mentioned, and I'll be surprised to see if anyone besides me remembers?
But
that 80s show?
I actually have seen every episode. I haven't seen it in years, but I loved it more than that 70s show.
That is so crazy, because that one was just like okay, that 70s show, I mean, it has all the normal problems of a sitcom, as far as becoming very dated very quickly and stuff, and even for something that's a period piece, it's still pretty dated, and all that stuff. But like, it's that 80s show was just everything that was kind of shallow about that 70s show cranked up to 10. Like, you could really, I really felt like you could tell that 70s show, you're definitely right. The people that at least originally started it definitely grew up in the 70s and had a feel for the time. That 80s show was just so generic, the 80s with stuff, that it was like, it felt so... It felt like what a 90s kid would think of the 80s almost, or something, or what a 70s kid would think of the 80s, where it's like, oh yeah, this one of our main characters has like this big spiky mohawk. No one outside of a fucking MTV video actually walked around every day with a goddamn spiked out gelled mohawk in the 80s. That shit's just so impractical. It was just like really, really shallow in that regard.
Well, maybe you're hitting on why it only lasted like 11 episodes. I still liked it better than that 70s show. I found a lot of the characters in that 70s show to be really irritating, and so
Fair.
it was a little refreshing to not have that in that 80s show. At least not with every character.
No, I think that's fair. Earlier you mentioned that you'd find it very weird if a show got made that like nostalgically looked at the late 90s or early 2000s. I don't know if you watch Black Mirror at all, but have you ever seen the Black Mirror episode San Juanipo or something like that? I can't remember the exact name of it. I can't figure out how to pronounce it. Junipero. Okay, so spoilers for that episode. So, spoiler alert for an episode of Black Mirror, everybody. It's about some old ladies who are living in the future, so they were our age now, and they kind of like just show you briefly. They're supposed to be our age in the 80s, actually, but anyway, they show briefly that they're like people living in retirement homes get previews of what it will be like instead of dying. You just have your brain dumped into a virtual reality where it's the town of San what the fuck ever in the 80s, 90s, or the 2000s. And it's just really kind of freaky to like see the culture and the fashion and stuff. They perfectly nailed like we only briefly go to the 2000s, but like they perfectly nailed like all the really gaudy fashion choices of the 2000s. Like everyone can look at like 90s fashion and like look at the ugly electric blue and shit. That was all over the place. Like people were constantly dressed like they're fucking going out for a jog in the middle of the like darkest night possible, but that was just the 90s, I guess. But no, like the 2000s gaudy fashion with like the women with the gigantic hoop earrings and shit. It was pretty funny, and very like otherworldly to see as a kid that grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, I think like it'd be just really surreal. Like I'm sure it would be as surreal as someone who grew up in the 70s and had vivid memories of the 70s seeing that 70s show. Like I remember talking to a guy, this was probably close to 10 years ago, talking about that 70s show, and like he grew up in that time period, and so for him it was a very different animal watching it than it was for me. Like for me, I was just like, oh, this is funny. But for him, he was like, yeah, this is something that we actually did, or that's something that we would actually do. And so like, it'd be just really odd for me if like they right now made a show set in like the year 2001 or 2002. And I just feel like, because I'd be like, oh wait, I do remember that thing, or like, oh yeah, that was a TV show. Like these characters are watching that show that I forgot existed. Because I remember that so much more than I do like the 90s. You know, I was born in 89, so like for all intents and purposes, I mean, I guess you could say I was a 90s kid, but really my memories are more about the 2000s. So that would be really weird, I think. That's why I was saying it would be kind of surreal.
Oh, it definitely would be. I just wouldn't know how to feel about that, because I guess I'd try to think about what that show would even be about, you know? Like, what do you do? Just, the memories are so fresh to me. I don't know, like, how you would really, you know, separate it, because I don't know, the 00s and the 2010s just really kind of bleed right into each other for me in a weird way. And that's probably just because I lived through them, but they feel so much more intimately connected than any other decade I can think of. Like, I lived through the 90s, but the 90s, you know, even though I was very young through them, the 90s felt very different to me retroactively than the 2000s or the 2010s. Whereas, like, I don't know, ever since 2001, politically, we've been dealing with the same goddamn bullshit. Like, you know, not to talk about a national tragedy, but like, Jesus, ever since those fucking towers have just been thing after thing after thing in the Middle East, and, you know, further right-leaning government ever since. And it's like, what the fuck do you do with that? They just feel more naturally connected to me than I guess anything else does, and that's probably just because I lived through them and I was, you know, more self-aware through them. You know, wasn't in a diaper through any of those years, at least that I can recall. And yet, I don't know. It's I'm kind of talking in circles here, I guess.
Well, like you say about Ian, but there's actually like a really, really good video by Alternative History Hub who kind of touches on that. And I feel like the reason why you feel like the 2000s to 2010s are like so connected is because really they are, in a way that like decades haven't been, just because of how we are as like a culture and society now. The internet's changed everything in terms of what trends happen, in terms of what people do, in terms of what like the media wants to set as individual thing, because it happens so fast now. Things can start and die in a day. In what the 80s or the 90s, they would have lasted for 5 years, just because that's how people in word of mouth got around of what was popular, what would people buy, what would people have and change. And not only that, is because there's no like identifiable people on TV wear this now, so they're the cool people and we need to dress like them. We still have that to like extent with like those whole like Instagram models and like famous like
there's
Twitter.
No Rachel haircut anymore.
Yeah, there's it, because everything is so, you can tailor what you want to you. Social media lets you hang out with the people you have interests with who would never meet in real life. Whereas before, because you had to make do with who you had around in your social circle, trends tend to kind of migrate more. And that's kind of been taken care of now, to the point when like media companies, the reason why we get so many reboots is because they're still banking on the 90s and 80s and like 70s nostalgia, because they've kind of ran out of things that people could be nostalgic for, because everyone can get whatever they want now on the internet to watch or enjoy or dress up like and buy. There's no trends being created that will have any lasting impact or define a decade that you used to.
I guess that's really interesting. So yeah, what would you make the 2000 show? You know, like if you had to make that 2000 show, what would the fuck it be? I don't know, and maybe it's just because I'm too attached to it still, but I don't know. It's just there's a lot there that feels really weird to think about.
And well, like, you know, with that 80s show and that 70s show, they were specifically, it's a small thing, but the title really can either, you can do a whole lot with it or you can be kind of limited by it. Like that 70s show, I think the first season was set in 77. And of course, they didn't know the show would last for 8 years. If they had, they probably would have said it earlier, or they probably would have been a little bit more vague with how much time passed. But very quickly, they realized, oh, wait, we've got to slow down because we're pretty soon going to be in 1980. But like with something like Fresh Off the Boat or the Goldbergs, I don't know how much time passes in those shows, but well, I know they both have actual children who are, you know, visibly aging because human beings do that. And so, yeah. So like with those shows, I guess conceivably they could move into the next decade. Like the Goldbergs has been going for like 5 years now, so it's possible if it went another few years, they could just have it ease into the 90s, and that could offer them a whole lot of new story potential, maybe. Or maybe they just want to say like, okay, now that all of our three children characters are like not as noticeably aging, maybe we're just going to kind of slow it down, and you know, kind of like what we talked about with timelines a couple weeks ago, like we're just going to slow it down. It's going to perpetually stay in 1988 or whatever. But with those shows, you could move it forward, and then that kind of gives you more room to play around with other stuff. But like, if you call it that OO show, then you really are kind of, and depending on when you said it, you're kind of like, you're setting a limit for yourself, which maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Like, you know, depending on, like when I was in school, you know, if the teacher would set a limit for something like on a project, sometimes that made it a lot easier to do the project than if they just said, go nuts, do whatever you want. So maybe setting a parameter and saying you cannot operate outside of this decade, and you're probably going to start in the middle of the decade, that kind of gives you some guidelines and kind of helps you along a little bit.
Yeah, it is so weird that 70s show takes, like, the finale of that 70s show takes place on New Year's Eve, 1979, and it ends with the countdown to midnight. And yet, like, Star Wars gets introduced in, like, season 1 of that show, and it came out in, what, 78?
Yeah.
And so that's just like, well, shit.
Yeah.
That show lasted, like, no time at all. It's so weird. Eric spent, like, a year in Africa, so, like, he wasn't even on the show for almost all of 1979 or some shit. It's so weird to think about. We've mentioned it a couple times. Did either of you guys watch much of Happy Days?
Not very much. That was, I mean, that was before all of our times, but I've seen a few episodes, especially when I was younger. It's not a, do what?
Nick at Night or TV
a little
Land?
bit.
Okay.
I guess both. They kind of blend together for me. I remember probably TV Land. I remember hearing Richie Cunningham saying, or the voice, you know, Ron Howard. I remember him saying something about like, keep watching TV Land or something like that. So I remember watching like a little bit of like Get Smart reruns and Green Acres, stuff like that, that shows from that time period, which I guess that's more like 2 decades of shows. But I didn't watch it just a ton. Like I wouldn't know a lot about it to have a conversation on it.
No, that's fair enough. I remember watching episodes of it. I even saw the infamous shark jumping episode before like I'd ever heard of the meme. So I was in on the joke, man. It was so weird. It's like I remember watching it on Nick at Night because my mom was like very, all right. So my parents divorced when I was very young. I have no memories of my parents being married. And my dad was always like, in retrospect, my dad was always really trying hard to make himself the cool parent. So like, I'd go over, my mom would be very strict on like, it's your bedtime, time to go to bed, yada, yada, yada. My dad didn't care if I went to bed at any time. He'd go to bed before me, even when I was like, still, you know, we're talking under 10 here, which is, you know, that's pretty significant. But anyway, so I'd stay up late and I'd watch fucking Nick at Night, of all things, because it's Nickelodeon. It was fine to watch for kids. And if it was on Nickelodeon, that means it was kid content or something, I guess. I don't know. So I remember watching Happy Days on there, and just, it was so odd to me when I came across the realization later in life that Happy Days was a period show. I'd assumed, for whatever reason, that Happy Days was a contemporary show. I assumed it was a show about the 50s made in the 50s. And so the realization that it was about the 50s made in the 70s, just, wow, that was weird to me. And then a couple years later, that 70s show started up. And I just assumed, oh, so like every 20 years, someone just makes a show about like 2 decades ago. Okay. Mm-hmm. And kind of it's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. I don't know. It's just it's a thing I remember thinking about. But like, Happy Days is, you know, again, that very just, it's so damn idyllic that it's kind of ridiculous, and it's hard to not just, I don't know if laugh at is the right word. It's kind of hard to not like feel the Americanness of it. That anyone could think that's what the 50s were. And I'm sure for some people that's what it was, but I don't know. I guess I tend to think more about the Rebel Without a Cause movies and shit like that for the 50s.
Mm-hmm. And well, you know, you mentioned, maybe this isn't the direction you wanted to go, but you mentioned that it was a kids show, and like I remember, like one of the episodes that I distinctly remember, I don't even think I saw the whole episode, but I think Chachi was a not Chachi, Joni was a teacher at one point, and like one of her students like tried to rape her, and like that was really weird seeing that in like a show that seemed like a lot of people have memories of it being like super wholesome and family friendly, and I think Fonzie ends up coming in and saving her, but like it didn't get very far, but definitely like thinking about it now, it's like, oh, that's really uncomfortable that happened, and like that's, I guess, that's something you wouldn't have seen on that 70s show. Like I don't think that show would have.
That something that direct, probably not, but like a lot of sitcoms, that 70s show has a lot of implied rape, and implied sexual assault. Like I'm pretty sure, like I in fact remember a bit where, Eric talks about how he accidentally, or someone accidentally walked in on Donna when she was taking her shirt off. And it was like this kind of awkward, but like, hey, kind of cool, I got to see boobies moment. And that's innocent, and it happens enough, you know, whatever. But then, like, I believe at the end of the episode was just like a montage of Kelso trying to run in on Donna taking off her shirt. Mm-hmm. Like, he just constantly walk in the room, just like, oh God, I'm so sorry, like over and over again. And so, like, there's that. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of jokes with Fez about him trying to, like, manipulate women into sleeping with him and stuff. There's a lot of, like, really implied stuff that does not age well in that series.
Oh, you're right. Season 1, especially, Fez is really creepy. Hyde is not especially pleasant. So, yeah, there's a lot of that. And I guess part of that you could say, like, and I feel like we're snowing Alfie out of the conversation. I don't mean to do that. But like,
no, it's fine.
I feel like part of that is you have a show that predominantly has teenage boys, and teenage boys are going to be very focused on sex. So, but it's also very uncomfortable because you don't want to normalize that behavior and make it seem like it's okay to do those things.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at when I said that even though the show was set in the 70s, it's still pretty dated, because of a lot of shit like that. I wouldn't go so far as to say, like, oh, you wouldn't be able to get away with jokes like that now, but you'd have a tougher time making it funny now. Like, I think that played better in the 2000s when the conversation around like rape culture had not evolved to the point it has today. And so I think that might be a reason why these shows get made, is because it's easier to kind of like get away with characters acting a bit more morally loose if you go and set things in a time when that kind of conversation wasn't there yet. Like, I think Alfie, I believe it was you that mentioned Mad Men earlier. And like that's kind of part of what that show's appeal was, is it could do things and it could characterize things around the fact that these kinds of social attitudes and progresses had not been made because it was the 60s. Yeah, I don't know.
And I haven't watched a whole lot of Mad Men. I actually gave it a shot. I watched a few episodes and it wasn't for me. I was interested in it. I really wanted to get into it, and it just was not something it was gonna be too intense for me to try and keep going. But what I've watched clips from all across the show, and what I find interesting about it is it's set in a time where equality was not a thing, but it does kind of like you've got strong, air quotes, strong female characters, which I hate that phrase. I'm much more interested in complex characters. They don't have to be strong. I just want interesting characters with multiple dimensions. And that's Mad Men has that. You've got female characters who are not just props for the men. You look at any media from the 60s, and that was not a thing. Like, you look at Marvel Comics, like the Fantastic Four, Human Torch has a specific personality. He's the hot-headed kid. The Thing has a personality. He's the grumpy uncle type character. And then Mr. Fantastic has a personality. He's the science action hero. The Invisible Girl is just the token girl. And Mad Men, even though it's set in the 60s, what I really like about what I've watched of it is that it's taking... it's giving as good as it gets, I guess is what I'm saying. Like the female characters there, they all are as important and as interesting as the male characters.
Yeah, and I think that's the distinction between like something like Mad Men and something like Happy Days. Mad Men's not nostalgic. Mad Men's like actively commenting on the era. Like I don't know much about the show, but like I know there's a moment where like a woman in the company proposes like this ad for beans where you see like a close-up on beans pouring out of a can into a bowl as they tumble, and it's meant to look very appetizing and everything. And like everything she describes, it's a modern day commercial. And you think about it in the context of the 60s commercials with like the really cheesy music and the announcer that just sounded very how do you describe 60s commercial announcer? Analytical, lectury almost. You see, Jimmy, the reason this needs to happen is like that was just the shit. Whereas, like, nowadays, if you have an announcer and a thing, it's almost trying to, convince you and sell you on it. It's like, oh, look how great this thing is. Anyway, like, so she's describing all this, and ultimately, the people she's pitching the ad to shoot her down, and they say, you're a stupid woman. We don't show close-ups of beans because they look like kidneys, and people don't want to think about the fact that they're eating, like, kidney-shaped things. And it's like, that's a fucking stupid-ass justification because it was the 60s and people were eating tongue, goddammit. And two, the whole reason that like he dismisses her is because she's a woman. It has nothing to do with the quality of her ad. So, like, Mad Men is not about, like, glorifying or looking nostalgically back on the 60s. It's taking actual characters and putting them in the social dynamics of the 60s. For better or worse.
And another show that I know even less about than Mad Men, that Fresh Off the Boat, I feel like that's a show you could have set in any time period, and you might could have done more with the drama if you set it in an earlier time period. Because from what I understand, it's supposed to be about this Asian family kind of trying to fit in a mostly white area, and the fact that it's set in the 90s almost seems incidental. Like, you could really do a lot more with that if it was
based
set.
off like one specific guy's life?
Maybe.
I'm
I don't
really
know.
reaching there. I'm not 100% on that, but like from what I remember, I think it's like the creator's life story kind of thing.
That would explain why they chose the 90s, I guess.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Just a thought. I don't know. It's weird when you think about like the gaps in time, because I don't really consider myself an overly nostalgic person. I can kind of take or leave the late 90s, early 2000s. I just probably leave them. There's not a lot of good looking back on those. The 90s had a lot of just really awfully merchandise things. Like, I tried to watch Street Sharks at one point. Again, that was not a good time. I don't know. Alfie, you've been too quiet. Say something. Input on the conversation.
Well, like, again, a lot of these things you guys are saying, and not only before my time, I don't think they're being broadcast in my country. I have, like, from what I've gathered just from, like, the shows you've, like, said, I think I've, like, the difference between, like, how British TV does this versus, I guess, like, the American TV is, like, you have very, very decades focused, and then characters will age, but then you'll, like, stick with the characters and it'll, like, end. Like you said with the 70 Shark, it ended at, like, 79 New Year's Eve. With British shows, they'll kind of, like, pick an era, specifically either, like, the 70s low-income, like, I don't know what the equivalent of, like, council estates would be in America, but, like, just, like, the bad parts of, like, town. And then or, like, really, like, 1900s pre-war England. Because England has, like, a very different kind of nostalgia compared to what you've described with America with, like, because we've just got everything kind of after World War II just kind of sucks shit for us. So, like, there's less periods of that, and more so periods of we'll have shows. My mother watches a lot of these. I know it's not my cup of tea, but, like, stuff like EastEnders or Downton Abbey will pick characters to follow in that time period, and then when that character's story is over, they won't end the show. They'll just make new characters in the same time period and then carry that on for, like, since, like, the 70s, though it's still airing kind of thing. So I guess I'm questioning, like, how you guys think about that method.
See, that's really interesting because American media, I feel, has this tendency, and I think this might be an expression of what we're talking about, has this tendency to just not let things end, and things will just go, like, way longer than they have any right to, you know, like Smallville. You know, they just keep going and going, and sometimes that can be really advantageous, but a lot of the times it's really painful. Whereas, you know, British stuff, I'll see it, I'm like, why did you end this thing already? You barely scratched the surface of what you could do. Like Black Adder, god damn it. It's like, it's so weird. For years I hear people talk about it like, oh yeah, Black Adder's so funny, it's so good. And I'm like, alright, fine, I'll watch it. You know, I can take the time to commit to, you know, a couple seasons of this weird British, you know, quirky comedy starring Mr. Bean. And then it's like 3 episodes for 4 seasons, and that's it. And I'm like, how do you just end it that quickly? How can you barely have time to get invested? It's so good, and you squandered it.
Ian, have you ever watched The Good Place?
Like the first 2 episodes.
Okay, so there's a character who's British in that show, and she's showing one of the other characters this British sitcom, and she says, it lasted 30 episodes, nearly 16 years.
Yes.
That's
so
like,
on point.
yeah. Also makes me think of Inspector Spacetime and Community, where
Right.
or no, it was Cougarton Abbey was the show that because Abed was a fan of Cougar Town, so Britta was like, hey, there's this British show it's based on called Cougarton Abbey, and it only lasted 6 episodes, and they all poisoned themselves with hemlock, and so Abed has like a mental breakdown and Britta's like, yeah, in Great Britain they have closure, they don't just let things go on forever.
Yep.
That's totally, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's like these shows that are just, okay, it's just these characters in this decade. I think that's probably why that's so different to you, Alfie, because like your shows are used to closure.
Like the whole like thing. I like when Sarah was trying to get me into like the CW shows or like Flash and Arrow. I was just like, oh, okay, that sounds superhero shows. That's cool. I wonder how many seasons. And I'm just like, they have how many episodes in a season? This over 1 year? What? Where did they get the time? Because like it was just how we structure our media is very quick. It's very proper. You get the job done and then you pack up and leave for the next person, kind of thing. Rather than let's just keep this going for as long as it can until it's run into the ground, and then we might end it or make a spin-off around it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean it's weird to think about that because. All right, so all of these shows were contemporary. I've got to pull up the list. Give me a second. I've got to try to remember where it all starts. It's All in the Family where it all starts, right? All in the Family cinematic universe. Okay, All in the Family cinematic universe.
Nick Fury shows up and says, "You don't understand. We're all in the family."
Right? Okay. So All in the Family is the show. It's the one that like kind of Family Guy is ripping off in the intro where it's like, you know, Lois and Peter at the piano. Yeah, but like so that's the really famous opening where it's like, those were the days, like that shit. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that's All in the Family with Archie Bunker's racist ass. Okay. So like All in the Family eventually starts to get really weird because it has a spin-off at the end. And the spin-off has a spin-off. And like there are so many shows that go off of All in the Family. Like, so I think everybody knows the Jeffersons, right? Like, if I talk about the Jeffersons, everyone knows what show that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alfie?
I think so. Is it the one with like in the house?
What?
Or am I completely off base?
I didn't hear what you said.
Is it the one where like in a house and like good night, good night, good night?
No. That's, God, I don't remember what that is. The Jeffersons was like the first black, or not the first, but one of the first like big mainstream black shows that was a big success. You know, like Beans Don't Burn in the Kitchen, or something's like Moving On Up is the theme song to that one and everything. God damn it, why can't I find the spin-offs? All in the Family spin-off would probably have been a better term to use than cinematic universe. Spin-off tree. There we go. Okay. Alright, All in the Family tree. Okay. All in the Family runs from 1971 to 1979. Maude runs from 1972 to 1978, which spins off into Good Times, which runs from 1974 to 1979. From All in the Family, we get the Jeffersons, because George Jefferson was the dry cleaner owner, but then his business really took off and he opened a chain, and that like led him, he's this working class black man that kind of got rich, so he was new money, and it kind of led him into this society, and there were all these wacky adventures with that. So All in the Family spun off into the Jeffersons from 1975 to 1985, which spun off to a short-lived series called Checking In. I don't even know what the fuck that's about, which only lasted, looks like, one season in 1981. All in the Family also spun off into Archie Bunker's Place, which was just a solo Archie Bunker show. That sounds terrible because Archie Bunker was racist, which lasted from 1979 to 1983. Then that got spun off into Gloria, which lasted from 1982 to 1983. And All in the Family also spun off to 704 Hauser Street, which was just one season in 1994. I feel like one of these is missing. Why do I feel like Three's Company was also connected to All in the Family? I really feel like it was.
I don't think so. They may have done like a crossover episode, but I know it started off as its own thing.
Okay. Yeah, so it's just crazy. Like, so you have this thing, and that's like a decade worth, like 3 decades worth of television were all rooted together. That's ridiculous. But also, it's not like it stopped there, because I love Frasier. Frasier is a spin-off of Cheers, and both of them ran for 10 years apiece. And like, there's a joke in the final season of Frasier where he's, of course, getting back, like, restarting a romance with one of his exes who has become a child star, like, one of those, like, Barney types almost kind of thing. And she is just, because she's, like, always, like, steeped in kid-friendly, family-friendly stuff, she's become like a sex-crazed maniac and just keeps trying to fuck Frasier in like public places because of the thrill. And at one point she like, there's a great fourth wall break where she goes, "Frasier, please, you have no idea what it's like to play the same character for 20 years. And the whole audience just like loses it at that. But yeah, like, so there is that just, even when it's not set in an era, all of those shows were contemporary. Like, they were set, the day they were coming out, basically. But it never died. And so I think that's kind of what kind of led into these nostalgic shows. It's like, oh man, we had, shows that were set around the 70s for so long, but now we don't anymore. What if we just made one? Like there's just that show that's in the 70s. Let's just do one of those. But in the 2000s, we'll just make it in the 2000s. And I mean, there's very little about something like that 70s show that doesn't feel like it couldn't have maybe come out in the 70s. It's a little too self-aware of what's going to actually be important. It's a little too risque for stuff, but like a lot of it just, it's not really doing anything all that innovative. I don't know, just something we're thinking about.
It starts to get away from a lot of the the stuff that was going on, like like when they go and watch A New Hope in theaters, or when Gerald Ford is president. But they start to get away from some of that. But then, like, I feel like if the show was set in the 2000s, they'd have internet connection. Whereas a big part of the show is they don't even have VHS tapes. Like, they just, their only form of entertainment is to hang out with each other. And so that, I think in that way, it couldn't have been set in another decade. But I do think they get away from a lot of the air quotes 70s-ness of it as they go along.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially because stuff just starts to feel like kind of lost. Like they really just start to like run out of ideas because it ran for entirely too long. Yeah. I don't know. What else can we talk about with this? We need to fill some more time.
Did you ever watch 30 Rock?
Yeah. Yeah, why?
They did a joke about they said something about Black Frasier, and they said, "What? I've never heard of that." And then it cuts to like, and it's a joke that 100% could have happened in regular Frasier. It's just black actors playing like Black Martin and Black Niles and Black Fraser. It's hilarious. You need to just look up Black Fraser on YouTube.
Okay, I'll have to do that.
That's one of my favorite 30 Rock jokes.
Okay, my favorite's still Werewolf Bar Mitzvah.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's that gold record I got for my song Werewolf Bar Mitzvah. Werewolf Bar Mitzvah, spooky, scary, oh so hairy. Boys becoming men, men becoming wolves. It's so stupid. Yeah, I don't know. What else? Alfie, you take us in a direction again. The
right.
British television thing was interesting.
I guess you guys have spoken a lot about your experience and like history with a couple of these shows. If you were like asked by like a media mogul or something like, "Hey, you kid, I want a new fresh idea on the thing." I don't know if it sounds like a 1940s like radio man, but roll with it. What decade would you guys pick individually?
Ruben, you go first.
Well, it's hard because like we've all like my favorite as far as like pop culture goes. My favorite decade is the 80s. Like, I think we got some of the best comics in the 80s. Like, my favorite movies are from that time period. So, and I hate that 80s show kind of has laid claim to that decade because it only lasted, like, 10 or 11 episodes. But I'd love to see something done there. And I know that, like, the Goldbergs is set in that time, but I've never watched it, so I don't know if it's any good. But I would love to, if, given carte blanche and I could do it even if someone else has already done it, I would probably choose the 80s. But I don't know what the show would be about or who the characters would be or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm just like, as well, I guess I'll kind of add another addendum is, would you make it more idyllic, kind of like the good things of the 80s, or would you try and do like a madman approach and say, here's the 80s as it was looking at back now?
Well, anyone who knows me knows I don't really like to get into the real talk, but that might be the better approach. Like, the 80s is when you had like, well, I guess like the Rodney King thing might have been very early 90s, but you had a lot of that going on in the 80s. So that might be the better, I mean, like Mad Men lasted forever, didn't it? Like it lasted like at least 5 years, but so that might be the way to go, but that would not be a show I would necessarily be interested in working on because I think it would be very emotionally taxing. But that might be something that would be more viable and more culturally important.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess I'm weird because like I would like to do a thing that probably no one's really alive for anymore. I'd like to do some stuff like set in the 30s. Great Depression, shit like that just really sounds like it'd be interesting to talk about and like do a show just set around. With like, it'd probably be more poignant today than it has any goddamn right to be. But like, just you could subtly make it just about today, but it's just set in the 30s, so it's like, that Hitler always coming up with the stupidest ideas. That guy's crazy. No one's ever gonna actually listen to him. And then you've got just, I don't know, shit going down left and right. It looks like there's no end in sight to this rampant poverty around. It'd be pretty fucking depressing. As far as like an idyllic show set in a decade, man, I guess I'm just a fucking sourpuss. I don't think there's ever been like an ideal time. I don't think anything's ever been like really good. I think history's kind of just a shit show.
What about the 1700s? That was pretty good. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding,
the
everyone.
1700s? Okay.
Ruben, just because you're a dragon slayer.
I kid everyone.
It actually might be really funny to do like a super kind of or super goofy like medieval show. Like, wouldn't that be hilarious if you just had like a show set in the medieval era, and there's like just shit going wrong constantly, but the characters are all like, "Oh well," like in your your classic sitcom format.
Monty Python as a sitcom would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like it's, I guess that's kind of sort of almost been done with Disenchanted, but that's like a fantasy thing, and I don't think you need to do the fantasy side of stuff. I think it could be fun to just like, I mean, I guess that's kind of what Blackadder did for like 2 seasons. Now that I think about it, but you know, do it and actually let it have legs. You know,
yeah.
God damn it. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere.
It wasn't a TV show, but did you see that that movie that had Aubrey Plaza and it had Dave Franco in it, and I think John C. Reilly was in it. It was like a medieval, like really raunchy comedy movie.
No.
Oh, okay. I don't even remember the name of it, but like Dave Franco plays like a peasant, and the guy Nick Offerman plays like a lord of a castle, and his wife is like a huge like sex crazed maniac, and she is like trying to get with Dave Franco, and Nick Offerman sees this from up on the castle wall, and only like one of the only things I remember from the commercial is he just tells one of his knights, he says, "Bring me his balls," and like it looks just like insanely raunchy, but like it almost sounds like what you were talking about, except as a movie instead of a TV show.
Yeah, I don't know. Something like that could be fun. Just, I don't know, like the classic, you know, sitcom hijinks, but just set in the medieval era could be hilarious to me. I don't know. I guess I just remember that scene in Blackadder where he gets married off and he's not happy about it, but he just kind of accepts it, and he's like, "All right, fine, let me meet my wife." And then like a 5-year-old girl walks out, and I was like, "That's funny."
Oh no, that's awful.
But it was really good. Like, that's a really funny joke. Oh man, there's a joke in Blackadder. I want to say it was like the second season of Blackadder, or series of Blackadder, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Where like his he keeps like, you know, going to the doctor. The doctor's like, "Oh, leeches," and it's like it didn't matter what it was for. It's like, "I've got a headache." Leeches. That was just really fucking funny. So something like that, but let it have legs. Blackadder got weird though, because there was like the fucking World War I bit, and then there was like the time travel one. Or no, it was the Christmas special that was the time travel one.
I saw a clip. I saw a clip from the time travel one and did not know what was going on, because I only ever saw like the first episode of Blackadder, and then I saw a clip that was set in like the French Revolution era, and then I see this other clip where Mr. Bean is referencing Kenneth Branagh by name, and I'm like, what is going on? How does he know who that is? And it was funny, but I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, pretty much. There's also the really good Rowan Atkinson as Doctor Who spoof that they did. That was pretty fucking funny. Just if we're gonna talk about British comedy for a second. Okay.
Black Books. Everyone go watch Black Books. It's on YouTube. It's free. Sorry.
Never heard of it. I will have to see if I can give that a try this weekend.
It's if you've ever heard of the IT Crowd, it's from the same guy who did that show, but in my opinion, it's a lot funnier than the IT Crowd. So, you know. Okay,
cool. All right. Well, we're close enough to the end. I don't know. This is an interesting thing to talk about. I'm not really sure if we delved into anything deep. I guess like the regret thing I mentioned at the beginning, we didn't really get into. Did anyone want to voice any more thoughts on that? Because I was just kind of taking a shot at it in the dark based on the way a lot of that stuff idealizes things, but no one really kind of took me up one way or the other on that one.
You go ahead.
Go
Yeah.
Alright. So you can kind of like, it's hard to talk about like specific things like that without like having more history on like the material, like individual like things. It's like, okay, who were the creators behind this and what were their motivations particularly. But if we're going like with a general sense, I feel like we always kind of want to look at history as more grand and like important than it actually is. Obviously, history is important because we would even be here. Uh, my partner will kill me for like dissing her like not university degree, but like so it's kind of that thing where we want to make it seem more in depth, involved, had more things to say, which is kind of like why we do these TV shows or like these movies set in these places. We want to get a feeling that happened and that led us to where we are, and it was like it's all been leading up to something, and we're still leading up to something like great and grand. But like as you kind of said earlier, Ian, it's all kind of been a shit show of like people not knowing what the fuck's going on from the bottom to the top and just kind of winging their way through to civilization, and that's how we are now, and we're still kind of doing that. It's just kind of wondering who's going to eventually just fuck up and like blow us all up. So I guess that kind of goes into like the whole regret thing. I wanted to maybe just make things seem nicer than they were, or even if you're doing like a mean thing, or like with like Mad Men, where you want to take like a more critical look, it's still got this cool look to it. It's still got the music of the time. It's still everything's got like a unique style and feel that even if it's looking harsher, it still somehow looks different enough from us where it feels important. And it feels grand in a way that by just leaving stuff in even textbooks kind of try and try and raise things higher than they actually were, and just if you looked at it as like people. So maybe that goes into your point, yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just because you made me think of this for whatever reason. Also, a show, like a wacky sitcom set in and around the Manhattan Project. That is all.
We are all sons of bitches. LOL.
Well, no, like dead
No,
serious. Like Feynman. Like this is gonna sound crazy, but like Feynman was totally a Kramer type. He was like the wacky one that would pull pranks. Like I do not shit you. Like he would go around to people's desks and like steal shit as a joke, which pissed off the CIA because they thought he was a fucking spy. Like that was a thing that happened.
That does
I don't
sound
know.
really-
Yeah, like you got the fucking like you got or I guess if you don't do the Manhattan Project itself, you could do like Project Paperclip with all the Nazi scientists that were hired by the US to get us to the moon. That could be like it'd be fucking dark as shit, but you could do some wacky hijinks with that, and that would be pretty fucking funny. Like the Soviet villains that like every week they run away laughing with another Nazi scientist that they flipped.
That would be great. I
I'd
know
watch that
nothing
show.
about history, and I think that'd be funny.
You should really look into the Manhattan Projects and Operation Paperclip. It's fucking fascinating. Like, I love Archer, and Archer will occasionally do like some really biting criticism of the U.S. government. And at one point, Mallory Archer, who's like, you know, her whole character is that she's been a spy, like from World War II until the present. She's like, she talks about like, oh yeah, fucking Operation Paperclip. Walk into NASA and say Sieg Heil. Everyone stands right up. Jesus Christ. So that shit is so fucking funny. Okay. Anyway, I think we're good. I didn't know if there's anything worth talking about with like the regret thing. I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. Whose turn is it? Alfie, did we review a thing you picked last week?
Mhm.
Yeah, Powerless, right?
Yep.
Oh, yeah,
Powerless.
you're right. Okay, so it's my turn for a review topic. What's something that I've been wanting to talk about lately? I feel like I've got something, and now I can't think of it. I hate that feeling so much. God damn it.
And you'll remember right after we finish recording.
I mean, pretty fucking much. Like, it's stupid. God damn it. movie or something. I mean, we could do something dumb. I just watched it. I don't want to watch The Protector again. That's too much. Fuck. What's something good? All right. I'm gonna pick something dumb but awesome. Shit. I don't got anything. I hate this feeling. I'm so unprepared right now. Oh no. Someone come up with entertaining filler while I try to think here.
So Ruben,
Yeah.
did you know that X-Men suck balls? La 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 la.
Oh, I have heard someone. I saw. I'm in an X-Men group on Facebook, and someone posted like, apparently someone has watched Dark Phoenix, and they're like, "Oh, it's not going to be good." And I was like, I could have told you that. I'm really like, I know like from a business perspective, it's not good that like Disney is sucking up all these companies, but I'd also really like for the X-Men to get a good movie.
It's really hard, you know, that's the thing with Disney. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate that this company that abuses copyright law all the time is getting all these properties that they can abuse the copyright law on. But at the same time, you gotta give Disney some credit. Even when they have a flop, there's a certain level of quality to the damn thing. Like, Tomorrowland was a huge failure, but like, I mean, it had George Clooney. Like, there was a lot going right with that movie. Even when Disney flops a thing, they put a lot of quality into the damn project.
Yeah, and
All right.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I'm just gonna kind of go with the cop out and pick like a comic thing that I don't think we've talked about on the show before. But something I've kind of been wanting to make myself reread, and this will probably be a good opportunity to do that. Okay. So how cool are you guys with me hijacking the next couple episodes? Because I don't want to do it all in one episode. I would like to do it episode by episode, but I don't want to like drag it out over like 2 months. Okay.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
It's your show, man.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's review all of the Batman War Games arc. Starting from War Drums, going through War Crimes. Is that doable for everybody?
It's doable for me. I may regret it by the end. I know I will regret it by the end. But
I take it back, all those kind words. This is your show anymore. Ruben, it's time to get off this ship before it crashes and kills us all. Yes, I can do it.
I guess I'm gonna be the weird one because I actually like war games.
This will be an interesting.
It's been years since I've read it, so I'm just being like comically harsh.
Okay, fair enough. All right, yeah. So War Drums, War Games Acts 1, 2, and 3, and War Crimes. That'll be the next few episodes of Geeky Gentlemen.
So for next week, do we just need to read War Drums?
Yes.
Okay, I can do that.
All right. Everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.